The first thing you hear is the river. Not calm, not gentle, but heavy, churning, alive with sound. Look down the Seine, and the water turns to wood and sail. Hundreds of Viking ships, their prows carved into snarling beasts, press, shoulder to shoulder, until the river itself seems to crawl. Drums echo off the banks like thunder caught between stone. Each beat means another 100 men, each oar another heartbeat closing in on Paris. You smell pitch on the air, tar and salt, and the smoke of yesterday's fires. Villages up the river are ash. Monks hang from their cloisters by the belts of their robes. Every rumor that rides ahead of the fleet says the same thing. Paris will burn next. You stand on the wall, looking out. A horizon of sails, a river that has become an army, and below you, a city that cannot flee. The bridges are the only link between the island and the world. Two narrow spines of stone and timber that cross the Seine and tie Paris to its banks. If those bridges fall, the city falls with them. There are no legions left to call, no imperial host marching to your rescue. Only 200 knights, tired, scarred, and vastly outnumbered, led by Count Odo, a man who knows that if the bridges break, so does the realm. He can hear the drums through the stone. He can feel the tremor in the ground where the first ships run aground. And when the horns rise from the Viking fleet, he doesn't call for retreat. He raises the flag, and the river answers. Because this fight won't be won by numbers. It won't be won by rage or gold. It will be won by geometry, by two bridges, by a city that learned how to breathe through a keyhole. This is not the story of conquest. It's the story of containment, of how one island in the Seine became a fortress that could stop 30,000 invaders cold. This is the siege of Paris, and how 200 knights stood against the flood. Hold that image, the water, the ships, the bridges. Now let's step back and see how this river, this plan, and one impossible stand rewrote the fate of a kingdom.
You expect a flood to swallow the streets of Paris, but instead, it's the river that swallows the invaders. The Seine, wide, winding, and calm through most seasons, now boils with ships. Hundreds of long, narrow Viking longships, each carved with dragon prows and filled with warriors, pack the current from bend to bend. Men crowd both banks, their shouts bouncing off the stone walls of the island city. It should feel like the end, but something's off. The river doesn't open toward Paris, it squeezes. The Seine narrows sharply around a small island in the center, the Île de la Cité, a raised patch of land where the city's heart sits. And at each end of that island stands a bridge, one to the north, one to the south. Two narrow necks of stone and wood, crowned with towers, like clamps holding the city tight. Paris, in the late 800s, wasn't the grand city you imagine today. It was smaller, barely a mile wide, a cluster of stone houses, timber halls and church towers hugging the center of the river. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in strategy. Every road, every alley, every gate funneled through those bridges. If the Vikings wanted Paris, they had to take those crossings. And that was the genius of the city's defense. Because in war, mass means width. An army wins when it can spread wide, flank, surround, crush. But here, the Vikings could not spread. They were forced to fight in files, in narrow lines where only a few men could reach the defenders at once. It was as if a whole sea of soldiers had been turned into a single column. The noise said doom, but the map said, wait your turn. The bridges weren't just crossings, they were fortresses in disguise. Thick piers rose out of the water, built from cut stone. Above them, wooden towers bristled with arrows, each level manned by archers and spearmen who could rain death from above. And beneath, heavy iron chains were stretched across the water to block ships from ramming through. Think of a stadium emptying after a match, 70,000 people cheering, surging for the exit. But one small gate decides the pace. That's what the Seine did here. It turned 30,000 Vikings into a waiting line. Abbo, a monk who watched it unfold, loved numbers. He wrote of hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of warriors. But the real secret wasn't the count. It was geometry. The river narrowed the fight until even 10 men could block 10,000. Count Odo, the city's commander, and Bishop Gozlin, its priest and tactician, saw what few others did. You don't fight the sea, you fight the tide. They refused to meet the horde in open fields. Instead, they built higher, they strengthened the towers. They filled the gaps with fire pots, arrows, and boiling pitch. They would not defeat the Vikings, they would delay them, until time itself became their weapon. The fleet pushed forward. Long ladders clattered against stone. Rams struck the piers. Flaming pots hissed as they shattered against wet wood. But each assault ended the same way, at teeth of ashlar and oak, with the river itself fighting on the side of Paris. Everywhere the Vikings turned, they found the same truth. A force that big couldn't move through a door that small. And yet, those bridges didn't exist by luck. They were built because of a law written long before this siege, that turned the Seine from a road into a wall. And that's where the story begins to shift. Not in battle, but in policy.
What if the hero who saved Paris didn't swing a sword, but signed a law? 2 decades before the siege, the Frankish king Charles the Bald, grandson of Charlemagne, watched Viking fleets tear through his lands. They didn't march like armies, they sailed. Their longships glided up every river, the Seine, the Loire, the Garonne, striking deep inland before anyone could react. Towns were burned, churches plundered. Even royal cities fell without warning. Charles realized the problem wasn't just strength, it was speed. The rivers that made his empire rich also made it vulnerable. So he issued a royal command: build bridges that block ships. Not crossings, barriers. Each one a gate that could stop the flow of raiders before they reached a city. The idea was simple: don't chase the Vikings, trap them. Paris became the model. The island at its heart, the Île de la Cité, was the perfect place to test the new law. 2 bridges were raised, one of stone, the Grand Pont, massive and permanent, and one of wood, the Petit Pont, lighter, easier to repair. They stood like clamps around the island's waist, guarded by towers at both ends, their bases sunk deep into the riverbed. Imagine the sight in the 860s. Stonemasons shaping blocks beside the water, smiths forging hinges and iron bars, carpenters fitting beams that would soon carry soldiers. Every bridge was part road, part fortress, part trap. And for the first time, the Seine stopped being a highway. It became a gate. Ships could no longer drift unchallenged past the city. They had to stop, to negotiate, to fight. And that alone gave Paris a weapon it had never had before: time. When the Viking fleets came early in the 880s, they saw those bridges and asked for permission to pass. They sent envoys, men draped in furs and iron, promising peace. "Let us pass," they said, "and we will not touch the city."
But Count Odo and Bishop Gauslin refused, because they understood the rule of bridges. Once you open the gate, the river belongs to them. So the Vikings stayed. Their camp spread for miles along both banks. Smoke from their fires rolled over the water. The city tightened. The bridges, those simple structures of wood and stone, suddenly became the only walls that mattered. When the first siege engines arrived, wooden towers on wheels, great catapults and fire-filled boats, Paris was ready. Every story added to the towers, every chain across the current, every sharpened stake. It all came from that one royal law. And as the longships crept closer, the river that had once carried the invaders now began to betray them. They would soon learn that when you fight a city built on an island, you're not just fighting men, you're fighting the water itself.
If you can't flood the door, you try to smash it. That's what the Vikings do next. From dawn till dusk, the air fills with sound. Creaking timbers, grinding wheels, ropes pulling weight. On both banks of the Seine they build. Massive siege engines rise like skeleton towers. You can see mangonels, early catapults, bending under tension. And ballistae, giant crossbows meant to throw spears thick as fence posts. The biggest machines are the rams. Long wooden beams, iron-tipped, hanging under roofs of wet hides. They look like moving houses with jaws. Each one needs dozens of men to swing. A ram works best on dry ground, straight run, flat swing, firm aim. But the Vikings are fighting on water. Their rams roll on barges, bumping in the current, pitching with the flow. Every time they line up for a strike, the river pulls them sideways or lifts the nose of the beam. To the men inside Paris, it must have looked like watching a drunk giant trying to punch through a wall. But these were not farmers with sticks. They were veterans from the north, warriors who'd burned cities across Europe. They adapted fast. Some hauled boats up the banks and lashed wheels underneath, turning hulls into land engines. Others tied rope lines across the river to steady the machines mid-current. Each time, the defenders countered. From the towers, archers fired in volleys. From the upper stories, men poured boiling pitch and molten lead. They dropped stones the size of helmets, and when those struck the wooden roofs, the sound cracked like thunder over the water. Abbo, the monk who chronicled it all, said you could smell the burned hair of men and horses, even from the walls. Fire was supposed to be the Vikings' element. They sent boats loaded with brush and tar downstream, hoping to burn the wooden bridge, but the current betrayed them. The boats snagged against the bridge piers and caught there, flames climbing, smoke rising, while defenders on the towers leaned out with hooks, pulling the burning hulls apart and dousing them with buckets. Every weapon they tried met the same truth. Height beats reach. Stone beats wood. Discipline beats chaos. And the defenders weren't just holding, they were learning. Every new Viking trick brought a new fix. When the rams came close, they built ram catchers, heavy wooden frames that jutted out from the parapets like jaws, reaching to bite the attackers first. When the enemy fired high arcs of flaming pitch, they layered their roofs with wet hides and clay. Every lesson was written in blood, and every fix made the next assault harder. Then came one of the boldest moments in the siege. One night, the city went quiet. Wind in the banners, river in the dark. No horns. The Vikings slept, thinking the defenders were spent. But before dawn, a small band of Frankish soldiers slipped across the bridge. They moved through fog like ghosts, crept up to the Viking siege engines, and with axes and hooks, they set them ablaze.
The night burst with orange light. 2 great rams fell into the water, burning from the inside out. When the Vikings woke, the machines were gone, and their morale cracked. Paris had shown that defense could go on the attack. That raid didn't win the siege, but it told both sides one thing. This was no ordinary city, and this war would be fought on the river's terms, not theirs. The next move wouldn't come from a sword, but from the sky. Night falls heavy. The air is wet and thick, and the sky glows faint from hidden moonlight. Rain starts slow, then steadier, until the Seine rises like it's breathing. At first, it's just more water under the bridge, but by midnight the current runs black and fast. Logs spin, ropes snap, the wooden pilings creak. Then, a groan that sounds almost alive. The wooden bridge, the petit pont, begins to shift. Supports crack, pins slip, and then with a noise that rolls like thunder through the city, the bridge gives way. When dawn breaks, one of the towers is gone, collapsed into the river, and the other stands alone on the far bank, a single island of stone surrounded by enemy ships. Inside that tower are maybe 20 men, tired, smoke-blackened, their food low. Outside, the river swarms with boats, and on the bank, the Vikings drag up wagons filled with hay and pitch. They mean to burn the tower down. They pile the hay at the base and light it. Smoke crawls up the wall like a living thing. Inside, the defenders pour water, throw sand, tear cloths to plug cracks. But the heat grows. The wooden beams above them start to glow. The air turns sharp and bright with cinders. Step by step, they fall back up the tower stairs, fighting fire with buckets and swords alike. When the tower finally gives, they do not surrender. They fight on the bridge's broken ribs until it all collapses beneath them. That tower burns, and Paris loses one of its doors. That loss hurts. The defenders watch the smoke rise from the island and know what it means. The wooden bridge is gone. Now only one, the stone bridge, the Grand Pont, stands between them and ruin. But stone holds what wood cannot. Odo and Gauselin move every man they have to that side. They dig shallow trenches along the banks, set archers in the windows, and brace the towers with new beams. Blacksmiths work by torchlight, hammering nails and patching armor. Every sound is preparation. Count Odo rides out through the siege lines to gather help. He cuts through enemy pickets, crosses the marsh in the rain, and brings back reinforcements weeks later. That single ride, that refusal to hide, becomes the legend people still tell. The city bends under the weight of hunger and loss, but it doesn't break. The river took one bridge, and the Vikings still can't cross the other. The siege becomes a test of endurance now, not of walls, but of will. By now, the siege has dragged for months. The air in the Viking camp smells of damp leather and rot. Engines are broken, ropes hang loose, and the men, once fierce and hungry for loot, now argue about food. A huge army eats like a fire burns, fast and wide. But the land around Paris has nothing left to give. The fields are stripped, the towns nearby are empty. Every extra day here costs lives without reward. You can feel it in the rhythm of the camp. Early in the siege, the drums beat fast, bold, proud, full of certainty. Now there are no drums, only coughing, creaking, and rain. This is the part of war people forget. the slow collapse that happens without a single blow. Fever spreads through tents. Boredom turns to anger. Anger turns to fear. And even the mightiest army starts to rot from the inside. Meanwhile, Paris holds. The towers still stand. The defenders still shoot from their walls. And each failed assault drains morale like a wound that won't close. The Vikings' strength, their numbers, now becomes their weakness. Because a choke point only lets a few men fight at once. The rest just stand and wait. Waiting for their turn, waiting for orders, waiting for food. And waiting kills faster than any sword. They try to go around, drag ships through shallows, portage them over mud. Each attempt bends back to the same result. The bridges still rule the river. After nearly a year of siege, the Vikings realized the truth. The city isn't beaten, and they aren't growing stronger. They start to talk. Silver for safe passage, money instead of blood. The Great War turns into a negotiation. Paris didn't win with an army. It won with patience, with stone, and with the rule that a narrow door can turn even a flood into a trickle. The longships finally pull away, their oars dipping in silence. The water that once carried their fury now carries them home. And the river, the same river that nearly drowned the city, glitters calm again. When the last longship drifted down the Seine, Paris didn't cheer. It just exhaled. Smoke still clung to the towers. Streets ran with black water from buckets tipped too many times. The air smelled of ash, wet rope, and old blood. But the city was still there. That alone was a victory worth remembering. What came next wasn't another battle. It was something slower, deeper. The kind of shift that doesn't make noise until years later. At the time, the empire that ruled these lands, the Carolingian Empire, descended from Charlemagne, was faltering. Its kings were weak, its borders loose, and its nobles were starting to think they could rule themselves better. In that vacuum, Count Odo of Paris, the man who had held the bridges with fewer than 200 knights, became more than a local hero. He became a symbol. While Emperor Charles the Fat, the ruler in name, had paid off the Vikings with silver to make them leave, Odo had fought them and won by endurance. To the common people, one man defended their homes. To the nobles, one man proved he could act when the empire could not. Word spread the way fire had spread months before. From monastery to village to court, his name traveled. The count who stood when others knelt. So when the empire splintered again a few years later, and the throne sat empty, the lords of the realm turned not to royal blood, but to the man who had kept Paris alive. They crowned Odo king. A defender became a ruler. A city's stand became the seed of a dynasty. From that crown came a new line, the Robertians, whose descendants would one day be known as the Capetians, the family that built the medieval kingdom of France. All from a bridge on a river, all from a handful of knights who refused to open a gate. But the story doesn't end with Paris. Downriver, the world was changing in another way. In the shadow of that same siege, the emperor's decision to pay off the Viking army had strange consequences. Instead of sailing home, many Norse leaders settled along the river itself. They traded instead of raiding, fought for land instead of loot. And from those settlements, a new power began to grow, a place where Norse warriors married Frankish women, where northern strength met Latin law, and where raiders turned into rulers. That land would soon have a name: Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The siege of Paris didn't just save a city. It shaped the map of medieval Europe. For what began as a river fight became the birth of a kingdom and the dawn of a duchy.
Look at that river again. At first, it seemed endless, a road for war wide enough to carry 30,000 men. But in the end, it all came down to space. 2 bridges, a few towers, a line of stone that refused to move. That's the heart of it. In war, it's not just who's stronger, but who controls the shape of the fight. A narrow passage beats a wide field. A single door can hold an empire. That's what Count Odo understood. That's what the monks wrote down so no one would forget. That's what the river remembers. When mass met stone, and stone did not break. And beyond tactics or titles, there's something deeply human in that story. When the flood rises and the world feels too big to fight, the answer isn't always to grow, it's to narrow the front, to stand where it matters most, to hold one bridge. That's how 200 knights stopped 30,000 invaders. That's how a city became a kingdom. And that's how a single stand on the Seine echoed through 1,000 years of history. If this changed how you see strength, not as size, but as shape, share it and subscribe for more fast, immersive history.